The first time I found something in the yard that didn't belong to anyone on my intake sheet, I was 31 years old and had been working salvage for 4 years. It was a '98 Civic with a rebuilt title, came off a repossession lot in Fresno, and when I popped the trunk, I found a sleeping bag and a grocery bag of canned food and a library book, 2 counties away from the library that owned it. Whoever had been living in that car was gone by the time it reached us. I put the canned food in my truck and turned the book over to Dennis, who ran the front office and claimed he'd mail it back, which he did not. That was the policy, not any written policy, just the unspoken one. Things end up here. You note what you can and let the rest go. I've thought about that Civic a lot in the past 6 months. I keep coming back to the idea of someone choosing to live inside a space that already had an ending assigned to it. Whether they knew what a repossession lot meant, or whether they just found an unlocked car and thought, this will hold me for a while. My name is Ray Cahill. I'm 37 now. I've worked the intake yard at Del Mar Salvage in Kettrick, California for the better part of 6 years, which is longer than anyone expected, including me. The yard sits off Route 9 about 2 miles east of the grain elevator. If you've driven through Kettrick, you've seen the rows of stacked cars from the highway, the fence with the faded orange weather stripping, the hand-painted sign that still says Lemon Parts and Salvage, because Dennis bought it from a guy named Ron Lemon in 2014 and never bothered to change it. It's not beautiful, but it's honest work, and it suited me, which is a statement about both the work and me. Intake is exactly what it sounds like. Cars come in from auctions, repo lots, insurance write-offs, private sellers, occasionally law enforcement impounds if we have the right contract active. I document them, condition, contents, VIN, title status, salvage designation. I photograph everything before anything is touched. I strip out anything that belongs with a person rather than a car, tag it for the office, and log what I did with it. You'd be surprised what ends up in salvage vehicles. Prescription bottles, photo albums, mail, children's drawings, hearing aids still in their case. I've found money once. $240 in an envelope in the glove box of a truck that came in off a fatal accident in Tulare. I turned it over to Dennis and never heard anything more about it. I'm not married. I was, briefly, to a woman named Claudia, who taught 2nd grade in Reedley, and who I met at a friend's birthday party in the fall of 2016. We separated 2 years later, not from anything dramatic. No one was unkind. No one did anything unforgivable. It was more like we had each misread something in the other person, and by the time we figured that out, we were already living as roommates who split utilities. The divorce was quiet. She moved back to Bakersfield where her parents were. We don't talk. I live in a ground floor apartment on Sutter Street in Kettrick, in a building called the Garfield Arms, which sounds like it should have architectural dignity, but is really just a 2-story stucco box with 12 units, a shared laundry room, and a parking lot that floods when it rains hard. Unit 4, which is mine, faces the back. It has 1 bedroom, a bathroom with a window that doesn't lock correctly, a kitchen that gets cold in February, and a door from the living room that goes out to a small concrete patio and a strip of grass that nobody tends. I've lived there for 4 years. I know the building sounds the specific creak of the 2nd step on the staircase, the way the pipes hiss on cold mornings, the angle of afternoon light on the wall between 2 and 4. It's not a place I love, but I know it. The cars that come through Del Mar are assigned staging numbers in the order they arrive, a 1 through A99, then it rolls to B1. I process them in sequence, 2 to 3 a day depending on condition, more if they're clean private sale vehicles, fewer if they're collision damage or multi-year impounds. Marcus, who does the mechanical stripping, works about 12 hours behind me. There's also a woman named Petra, who handles the auction-side paperwork from the office trailer, and Dennis, who owns it, and mostly takes phone calls and argues with insurance adjusters. During normal hours, it's the four of us plus whoever Dennis has hired that week for general labor, which turns over constantly. The yard closes at 6. I usually leave by 5:30. On the last Wednesday of February, a car came in as a late addition to the regular Fresno batch, a 2003 Volvo V70 wagon, dark green, with a cracked driver's side mirror and about 180,000 miles on it. The documentation was thin. Title transfer from a property clearance company, which usually means the previous owner died and the estate liquidated the vehicle. The form listed the vehicle as part of a residential contents disposal and gave an address in Clovis. No name on the prior owner line, which is unusual but not unheard of. Sometimes the estate company just fills out their own name and leaves the owner field blank if there's no surviving family to object. I didn't think much about it. I photographed the exterior, popped the hood, noted the coolant leak, and the condition of the belts. Then I opened the rear cargo area. The car had clearly been someone's living space. Not recently, it wasn't actively inhabited, but over time. There was a foam mat cut to fit the cargo floor, the kind of closed cell foam you get from a sporting goods store, faded and compressed to maybe a third of its original thickness. A rolled wool blanket, a canvas tote bag containing a water filter, a deck of cards, a folded piece of paper, a small flashlight, and a pair of reading glasses. The paper was a printed Google Maps route from Clovis to an address in Kettrick, to my address, specifically. 714 Sutter Street, number 4. I put it down and stepped back from the car. I checked the document envelope again, the title transfer paperwork, the intake order, the batch sheet from the Fresno lot. Nothing explained it. The route was printed in standard maps format, black ink on plain copy paper, with the turn-by-turn on the right side and the map image on the left, and my address populated in the destination field. The building name wasn't on there, just the street number and unit. It was accurate. I've had mail delivered with less specificity. My first thought was that it was a coincidence, which sounds ridiculous, but is the first thought you have. I share an address type with hundreds of people. Fourth units in ground floor stucco apartments are not rare in the Central Valley. My second thought was that the Sutter Street part was specific enough to rule that out. My third thought was that I should photograph it, which I did, then set it aside in the documentation envelope with a note that the item was retained pending review. I finished processing the car. I logged the foam mat and blanket as personal effects, same as I would log a sleeping bag or a coat. The reading glasses went into the effects bag. The flashlight I set aside to ask Dennis about, since flashlights are tools, and sometimes we keep tools. Then I got to the end of the day and sat in my truck for a few minutes before driving home. I thought about who might have known my address. My landlord, my ex-wife, my mother in Sacramento. 2 people from work. Marcus had been to my place once when I'd borrowed his truck, and he needed to pick it up. And Petra had dropped off a check there once when Dennis was out. A handful of people from before the job, from the period in my mid-30s when I was still attending things like birthday parties and picnics, who I've mostly lost contact with. None of them were plausible sources for a printed map found in a dead person's car. I was also aware and noted to myself while sitting in that truck that I didn't actually know the person was dead. The estate company's paperwork strongly implied it, but I hadn't confirmed it. Someone could have sold a car to a property clearance company for reasons other than dying. People give cars away. People walk away from things when they need to. I drove home. I made dinner. I checked my door lock twice before I went to bed, which I hadn't done in years. Not since just after the divorce, when I was living in a different place and sleeping badly, and checking everything twice as a kind of ritual I couldn't quite stop. I didn't tell myself there was a good reason to do it. I just did it. The next morning I went back to the Volvo before I started the day's intake. I wanted to look at the cargo area again in daylight, and without the documentation envelope in my hand. I don't know exactly what I was looking for. Some detail I'd missed, maybe. Confirmation that it was meaningless. The foam mat and blanket were gone because Marcus had cleared them to the disposal pile after I'd logged them. The canvas bag was still there, or I'd left it on the roof of my own car. I sat in the driver's seat. The seat was adjusted for someone considerably shorter than me. I'm 6'1", and I had to push back before I could straighten my legs. The interior smelled like old insulation and something faintly herbal, like dried rosemary. A circle was worn into the steering wheel cover at the 9 o'clock position, the leather pilled and soft where hands had rested the same way for years. The console had a groove worn into the plastic on the driver's side, where an elbow had rested. In the door pocket, beneath the owner's manual, and a folded insurance card that had expired in 2019, there was a photograph. Standard 4x6 print, the kind you get from a drugstore kiosk. It showed a stretch of highway I didn't recognize, 2 lanes, flat country on both sides, early morning light or late evening. The highway curved away in the distance. There was no vehicle in the shot, no person, nothing identifiable except the road itself and the open land and the particular quality of the light. On the back, in careful handwriting, in case you haven't seen it yet. I put it in my shirt pocket. I'm not sure why it wasn't my property. It should have gone in the effects bag with the glasses. But I put it in my pocket and drove to work, and didn't tell anyone about it. That's the decision I made first, the one I keep coming back to. Not to ignore it, just to hold it alone for a while, which is a different thing. Or it feels like a different thing. I'm less sure about that now. The property clearance company was called Vance Estate Services, and they had a website that looked like it hadn't been updated since 2017. A stock photo of a family shaking hands with a realtor, a phone number with a Fresno area code, a contact form. I filled out the contact form on my lunch break Thursday using my personal email, describing myself as a private buyer who had questions about a vehicle recently liquidated through their service. I didn't identify my actual connection to the car. I said I was interested in the Volvo V70. That had been part of a Clovis estate, and wanted to confirm the vehicle history before making an offer. That was a lie, but a contained one. The car was already in my yard and no longer for sale to anyone. I just needed a way in. Friday afternoon, a woman called me back. She sounded tired and slightly distracted, like she was doing 2 things at once, and she confirmed they had processed a residential estate in Clovis in January. She couldn't give me the prior owner's name privacy policy, she said, which I understood. I asked whether the estate had included personal effects that were supposed to transfer with the vehicle. She paused. We generally clear personal effects before liquidation. This vehicle still had items in it when it arrived at auction. Another pause, longer. That does occasionally happen with vehicles that have been stored. If items were in it when it was picked up, they would have transferred with the vehicle. We're not responsible for the contents of a vehicle once it's... I understand, I said. I'm not trying to make a claim. I was just wondering if there was a family member I could contact, in case any of the items were sentimental. She said she wasn't able to provide that information, and then said she hoped I enjoyed the car, and we hung up. I sat with my phone for a minute. She hadn't denied that the owner was deceased. She hadn't confirmed it either, but the way she'd said residential estate had the particular flatness of practiced language, a phrase that meant someone had died and left a house full of things that needed to go somewhere. What I hadn't mentioned to her, and what I kept not mentioning to anyone, was the photograph in my shirt pocket. I'd moved it to the inside pocket of my work jacket by then, which I wore every day. I took it out occasionally and looked at it, just the road, just the light, in case you haven't seen it yet. The handwriting was precise, the letters evenly spaced, the kind of printing that suggests someone who learned to write carefully and kept the habit. The ink was black, medium ballpoint, pressed firmly, not hurried. I tried to find the road in the photo. I spent 2 evenings doing it, which I'm slightly embarrassed to admit, zooming through Google Street View along Route 9, Route 33, Route 41, state highways I'd driven, and some I hadn't. The shot could have been anywhere flat. The Central Valley is full of 2-lane roads that look exactly like that at the right time of day. I gave it up. The photo wasn't telling me where it was. It was telling me something else, and I wasn't ready to figure out what. The canvas bag was in my apartment by then. I'd brought it home, which was another decision I made without fully deciding. It was sitting on my kitchen counter on Saturday morning when I actually looked through it carefully, instead of just cataloging it the way I would at work. The water filter was a Sawyer squeeze, clean and dry, used but maintained. The deck of cards was a standard bicycle deck, still complete I counted. The flashlight was a small Phoenix, the kind that runs on AA batteries and costs around $40. The reading glasses were plus 2.5 magnification, the drugstore kind. None of it told me anything about the person who'd kept it. But the canvas bag itself had a small embroidered patch on the inside pocket, the kind you'd sew on yourself rather than buy pre-made. A simple compass rose, blue thread on the canvas background, about the size of a $50. Competent sewing, not ornamental functional, like it was a marker rather than a decoration. I photographed the patch with my phone and then did something I'd been avoiding. I searched the Clovis area obituaries for January and February of this year. There are aggregator sites that pull from local papers, funeral home listings, and county death notices. I searched without a name, filtering for Clovis, filtering for the date range. There were 11 results. 6 were clearly wrong ages, circumstances, family descriptions that pointed elsewhere. 2 were women. That left 3 men. The one that stopped me was the third. Gerald Maurer, 71. No surviving immediate family. A brief notice paid for by a hospice organization rather than relatives. The listing described him as a longtime Central Valley resident who had worked in agricultural equipment maintenance and who had, in the notice's careful phrasing, spent his later years traveling. No photo. The funeral home was a small one in Clovis that specialized in direct cremation, the kind you use when there's no family to plan a service. Gerald Maurer. I said it out loud in my kitchen, which felt strange, like I was introducing myself to a name rather than just reading it. I tried to find more about him. There wasn't much. A business registration from 2009 for a sole proprietorship called Maurer Mobile Repair, which appeared to have been a one-man agricultural equipment service operating out of the Central Valley. The kind of small operation where one person with a truck and tools drives to farms and fixes equipment on site. It had dissolved as a registration in 2016. There was no social media presence, no LinkedIn profile, nothing. A name in a database here, a notice of dissolution there, a man who had existed mostly in the physical world. The Clovis address from the car's title transfer was a storage unit facility, not a house. I found this by typing the street address into a map search, and there it was, Valley Self-Storage, a row of orange roll-up doors off a frontage road. So, residential estate had been the clearance company's language for a storage unit contents, which meant Gerald Maurer had died with a storage unit and a car, and $11.50 in obituary costs paid by a hospice, and that was the estate, a storage unit. Someone had been living out of a Volvo V70 and keeping things in a storage unit in Clovis, and at the end of that life, the car had traveled through an auction and a salvage lot, and arrived in my intake yard with a printed map to my apartment inside it. I didn't sleep well Saturday night. I lay there running the obvious explanations and why they didn't hold. The most obvious, Gerald Maurer had somehow known me, or known of me, and the map was deliberate. But I'd never heard the name. I was 31 when he would have been driving that car regularly, living my Reedley to Bakersfield marriage, and working a job I've since left. I couldn't place him in any part of my life. The second possibility, the map, was coincidental. Someone had looked up a Kettrick address for a reason entirely unrelated to me. A friend's place, a delivery, a service call, and 714 Sutter Unit 4 happened to match mine. I found 3 other Sutter streets in Kern and Fresno counties. None of them had a 714. I checked. Third possibility, whoever had printed that map had made an error, had meant a different Sutter Street, a different city, and had printed it wrong. Possible. But the map was accurate to my address. You don't print an accurate map to the wrong place. On Sunday, I drove out to Valley Self-Storage in Clovis. It's a 2-hour drive from Kettrick, which I did not reason out or justify to myself. I just got up, fed some water to the plant I keep on the windowsill that Claudia bought, and that I've somehow kept alive for 3 years, and drove. I know that's not a rational response to finding a piece of paper in a dead man's car. I'm not defending it. The photograph was in my jacket pocket, and I wanted to stand in the physical location where some part of Gerald Maurer's life had been stored. The facility manager was a young man named Cody, who was eating a breakfast sandwich when I came in, and who had no particular interest in my presence. I told him I was the executor for an estate, and that I needed to confirm the unit had been properly vacated, which was not true in any legal sense, but was plausible enough on a Sunday morning in a self-storage office. I gave him Gerald Maurer's name. He looked it up. That unit was cleared out, January 28th. Clearance company signed off on it. Was there anything left in it? Anything they didn't take? He looked up from the screen. Are you with Vance? I'm handling the estate independently, which was technically meaningless, but he didn't push it. There was a vehicle in the unit, he said. Long-term. The Volvo. That was in the contract Maurer paid for a drive-in bay, extra height. Paid it up through the end of the year, even when he was sick. We kept it per the contract. Vance came and got it January 28th along with the rest. Was there anything in the unit after the car was removed? Left behind by accident? He looked at me for a moment, clearly wondering why I cared. There were some things swept to the side. We hold them 30 days in case of claim. Nobody claimed them. What happened to them? Tossed. It's been more than 30 days. I thanked him and left. I sat in my truck in the parking lot for a few minutes. The sky was flat white, the kind of February overcast that doesn't mean rain, just means the sun isn't visible. A man named Gerald Maurer had paid his storage unit through the end of the year, even when he knew he was sick. He'd made arrangements. He'd been deliberate about what he left where. That was when the map changed meaning for me. Not a misdirection, not an accident. A deliberate placement inside a car he knew was going to move after he was gone. He'd arranged for that car to reach someone, and either he'd arranged for it to reach me specifically, which I couldn't account for, or he'd left a map to an address he cared about for reasons I didn't yet understand. Both options were deeply uncomfortable for different reasons. I drove back to Kettrick and let myself into my apartment and stood in the kitchen for a while. The canvas bag was on the counter. I picked up the reading glasses and put them on. I have near-perfect distance vision, and reading glasses make everything up close swim. I took them off. I wasn't sure what I was doing. My phone rang at 8:14 that evening. Unknown number, Clovis area code. I answered it. The voice was a woman's, older, deliberate. "Mr. Cahill?" I said yes. "My name is Louise Tenner. I believe you've been making inquiries about my uncle's estate." I didn't say anything immediately, which was the honest response. "Cody called me," she said, with something that wasn't quite amusement. "He's my neighbor's kid. I asked him to let me know if anyone came asking about the unit." "I found something in the car," I said, "at my job." "I know you did." She paused. "He told me he'd put it there." The kitchen was quiet. Somewhere outside, a car went past on Sutter Street. I heard the specific sound my refrigerator makes at the end of its compressor cycle. A soft click, and then silence. "Gerald Maurer was your uncle," I said. "He was. Did he know me?" The pause before she answered was long enough that I understood the answer was complicated before she gave it. "He knew of you," she said carefully. "I don't know how much of the rest of it I should tell you over the phone." I looked at the canvas bag on my counter, the photograph on the table next to it, a road going somewhere in flat country under a particular quality of light. "Tell me where to meet you," I said. Louise Tenner lived in Madeira, which was 40 minutes north of Clovis and about an hour and a half from Kettrick. We agreed on the following Saturday, a coffee place she named near the fairgrounds. I wrote down the address and spent the week doing my job, which was the only sensible thing to do. Cars came in. I documented them. I thought about Gerald Maurer's storage unit and the way the woman on the phone had said he told me he'd put it there. Not he must have put it there. Not, I think he may have with the flat specificity of someone reporting a known fact. He knew of you. That phrase sat in a particular way. Not "he knew you," which would at least have given me something to refute or confirm. Knew of you implied information without contact, which is its own category of unsettling. You can know of a public figure. You can know of someone through a mutual acquaintance. You can know of someone through records, through second-hand accounts, through a connection you were never part of. I didn't tell Marcus or Petra. I filed the Volvo's intake paperwork normally, listed the retained personal effects, noted that the photograph had been removed from the vehicle per policy for damaged or distressed documentation items, which was a stretch of the policy language, but not an outright fabrication. I kept the bag, the photograph, and the printed map at my apartment. I looked at the photograph 4 or 5 more times during the week, without learning anything new from it. On Thursday, I did something I'd been putting off. I called my mother. My mother's name is Patricia, and she lives in Sacramento in the house she bought after my father left, which was when I was 9. She's 70 now, still works part-time at a garden center, has strong opinions about drought-resistant landscaping, and about my failure to remarry. We talk maybe once a month. She is not a person who withholds information for dramatic effect. She tends to say what she thinks with the efficiency of someone who has run out of patience for indirectness. If Gerald Maurer had any connection to my family history, she would either know about it or tell me plainly that she didn't. I asked if she'd ever heard the name. There was a pause that I analyzed too closely. "No," she said. "Who is it?" Something came up at work, a name on a title document. I thought it might be someone from when I was a kid. "Not that I know of," she said. "Why?" I told her it was nothing and changed the subject. The pause bothered me, not because it was long, just because it existed at all. My mother typically answers direct questions without hesitation. I told myself it was nothing and half believed it. Saturday, I drove to Madeira. The coffee place was a small independent shop, 3 blocks from the fairgrounds, the kind with mismatched chairs and a handwritten menu board. Louise Tenner was already there when I arrived, at a corner table, a woman in her late 60s with short gray hair and a canvas coat, and the composed look of someone who had decided before leaving the house how much she was going to say. She had a cup of tea. I ordered coffee. We shook hands. She was not immediately warm, but she wasn't guarded in a hostile way. More like careful. She looked at me the way you look at something you've heard described and are now comparing to the description. "You look like him," she said, before I sat down. I thought she meant Gerald Maurer. I started to say I'd never met the man. "Not Gerald," she said. "Your father." The room didn't change. The chairs were still mismatched. The menu was still handwritten. Someone 2 tables over was having a conversation about a leaking irrigation line. All of that continued. I sat down. "I never met my father," I said. "He left when I was 9. I don't have a clear memory of what he looked like." Louise nodded, like that confirmed something rather than contradicted it. "Gerald was your father's older brother," she said, "which makes him your uncle, which makes me," she paused, doing the calculation, "your first cousin once removed, I suppose, though I only learned about you 6 weeks ago." I have a particular response to information that reorganizes something I thought I understood, and it involves going very still and very quiet while I check it against everything I already know. I did that for about 15 seconds. "My mother never mentioned." "Your mother may not have known," Louise said. "Or she may have known and made a decision about what to tell you. I don't know which." "What was my father's name?" I said. Because I knew my father's name, I'd always known it, even though we'd never met as adults. Even though my mother spoke of him with the particular flatness she used for irrecoverable situations. His name was Daniel Cahill. I said this. "Daniel was Gerald's younger brother, yes," Louise said. "They were estranged, had been for about 20 years before Daniel died. I don't know the whole history. Gerald didn't talk about it much. He told me Daniel had a son he'd never met, and that he'd been trying to locate him for about 2 years before he got sick. Trying to locate me. He'd found you, about 18 months ago. He knew where you worked. He drove out to Kettrick once," he said. "He watched the yard from the road for a while and then left." I thought about the yard. Route 9, the orange weather stripping on the fence visible from the highway. A dark green Volvo parked on the shoulder. "Why didn't he come in?" Louise looked at her tea. "He said he didn't have the right. That he'd waited too long and lost the right to just walk up and introduce himself." She said it without obvious judgment, reporting it. Gerald was not always good at doing the direct thing. He was better at arranging situations. The canvas bag in my apartment, the photograph, the compass rose, the map, arranging situations. "He put the map in the car knowing it would reach me through the yard," I said. "He knew about your job. He knew how salvage intake works. He'd been in agricultural equipment long enough. He knew the car would get processed, and he knew you'd find it. And I think he thought it would be a softer entry than knocking on your door." I sat with that for a moment. The softness of it, and the strangeness of it. A dying man engineering a treasure hunt through a salvage yard so that his dead brother's son would find a map to his own apartment. "What was in the storage unit?" I asked. "The things Cody didn't manage to clear." Louise reached into the canvas tote beside her chair and set a shoebox on the table. It was taped shut with masking tape, my name written on the top in the same careful ballpoint from the photograph. "He left it with me," she said. "He told me to give it to you when you found the map and called." I looked at the box for a moment without touching it. "You've had this for 6 weeks, and you waited for me to come to you." Those were his instructions. She said it a little quietly, and I understood that she had found the instructions difficult. He was specific. I opened the box at the table, which seemed like the honest thing to do rather than taking it to my car. Inside was a folded letter, a photograph smaller than the one I'd found in the car, and a California driver's license. The license was my father's. Daniel Cahill, a Fresno address issued in 2003. The photograph was of my father's face, And I knew it was my father, because it looked like looking in a mirror at 20 years removed the same jaw, the same slightly asymmetric brow, the set of the eyes. I was not prepared for that. I'd seen one photograph of my father in my childhood, a group photo at a family event where he was half turned away, and I had no clear sense of his face. I put the license down and picked up the letter. It was 2 pages in the same handwriting as the photograph. Gerald Maurer had written clearly and without decoration. He'd said that he was sorry he hadn't found me sooner, that he'd been estranged from his brother, for reasons he outlined in a few sentences, a dispute over their mother's estate, 23 years of silence, the ordinary wreckage of 2 stubborn men who each believed they'd been wronged, that he had not known Daniel had a son until Daniel died in 2019, when a mutual acquaintance had mentioned it in passing, that he had spent time locating me, and that once he had, he'd been unable to decide what, if anything, he owed me, that he'd settled on the car because it would reach me through work, and because he was not well enough to drive to Kettrick himself, and because he wanted me to have the choice of whether to pick it up or set it down, that if I'd found the map and discarded it, he'd have understood that too. He'd also written that my father had been a decent man underneath the stubbornness, and that the estrangement had cost Gerald more than he'd admitted to anyone, and that he was glad to know I existed, and that I was doing all right, which he could determine from what he'd observed from the road. I refolded the letter and set it on the table. Louise was watching me with the expression of someone who has witnessed a controlled flood and is waiting to see how the ground settles. He watched me from the road, I said. Once, he told me. I thought about the worn spot on the steering wheel at the 9 o'clock position, the groove on the console where an elbow had rested. A man spending years driving alone in flat country, and then sitting on Route 9 watching an orange-fenced salvage yard from a distance, and then driving away. This was the part where I should have sat in a feeling for a while, I think. The uncle I'd never known, the father I'd lost before I understood what fathers were, the deliberate architecture of a dead man's final arrangement. There was something there that probably deserved to be processed, and I was processing it in the way I process things, which is quietly and incompletely and over a long time. But something was pulling at me that wasn't grief and wasn't gratitude. The address, I said, on the map. Louise waited. He'd been watching the yard from the road. That means he knew where I worked, but the map wasn't to the yard. I turned my coffee cup in my hands. It was to my apartment. How did he know where I lived? Louise's expression shifted slightly. Not guilt exactly. More like the recognition that something she'd hoped wouldn't come up had come up. I don't know the answer to that, she said. Is that the complete answer? She looked out the window for a moment. He was resourceful. He'd spent his whole career finding things, parts, machines, operators. He knew how to trace things. Louise. I waited until she looked back at me. Someone who was dying drove to Kettrick once, watched my workplace from the road, and then engineered a specific sequence to get a letter to me. That's not casual resourcefulness. That's a sustained investment of someone's final months. I want to know what he actually knew about me. She was quiet for long enough that I understood she was deciding something. He knew about the divorce, she said finally. He mentioned it, and he said something about he said he'd spoken to someone who knew you. Someone from before. I don't know who. Someone from before. The phrase settled oddly. I thought about my mother's pause on the phone. That half second before, no, who is it? The slight delay that I'd noted and then dismissed because dismissing it was easier. Did he ever contact my mother? I asked. Louise looked at me and didn't answer, which was its own answer. I drove home from Madeira with the shoebox on my passenger seat and the photograph on top of the letter inside it, the driver's license face that was my face with 20 years of different living on it. I called my mother from the parking lot of a gas station in Fresno, engine running, because I needed to do it before I thought too carefully about what I was going to say. She answered on the third ring. "Gerald Maurer," I said. "I need you to tell me the truth this time." The silence on the line was longer than the first one. How do you know that name?" "He sent something through my job. His niece met with me today." "Mom." I kept my voice level. "How long did you know he was looking for me?" Another pause. When she spoke, something in her voice was different, older and more tired. "He called me about 1.5 years ago, maybe closer to 2 years. And you didn't tell me." "I didn't know what he wanted. I didn't know his intentions. He wanted to give me a letter from his dead brother." My voice was still level, which was taking more effort than it would have 10 minutes earlier. "He wanted to give me a photograph of my father's face. Those were his intentions." "Ray, did you tell him where I lived?" The silence this time was the longest. "He already knew where you worked," she said, very quietly. "I told him the apartment. He said he just wanted to make sure anything he left would reach you." I sat in the parking lot. A truck pulled in and a man got out and went inside to pay for gas. The sky was the same flat white it had been all week. My mother had known. For 1.5 years she'd known a man was trying to reach me, and she'd held that information and given him my address and said nothing. The reasons were probably ones I could understand. If I worked at it, a protective instinct. The particular caution of a woman who had rebuilt a life after a man left, and who did not want that history reopened. The reasons were real, and I was going to have to do something with them, but not in this parking lot. "I'll call you this week," I said. "I need some time first." I drove home. I let myself into the apartment and set the shoebox on the kitchen table next to the canvas bag, and the two objects sat there together in the way that things sit when they've been waiting for each other. I stood at the window and looked out at the strip of untended grass behind the building and the fence beyond it. The door I'd wanted to call meaningless the coincidence theory, the map as accident, the dead man as stranger, was gone now. I'd closed it myself by driving to Madera and by calling my mother. What was left was this. My uncle had arranged for something to find me. My mother had helped it. The arrangement had worked exactly as designed, and underneath that, something I hadn't let myself think about directly yet. My father had a face. I looked like it. He had died in 2019, which was 4 years ago, which was while I was working at Del Mar, which was while I was living 40 minutes from Clovis. He had died in Clovis. I was almost certain of it now, though I hadn't asked Louise and she hadn't said. I was almost certain because otherwise the whole geography was wrong. My father had been 40 minutes away from me for some portion of my adult life, and I had not known. And now he was dead, and his older brother had spent his own last months building a machine to hand me a photograph of a face I would never stop recognizing. I didn't open my father's letter that night. It sat in the shoebox on the kitchen table, and I moved around it the way you move around something that hasn't declared itself yet. I made dinner. I watched part of a documentary about coastal erosion that I didn't finish. I went to bed at 10:30 and lay there for a while and then slept, which surprised me. My body had apparently decided the day was over, regardless of what my mind was doing. Sunday, I called Louise back. She answered quickly, like she'd been expecting it. I asked her the question I hadn't asked at the coffee shop, because the other questions had gotten there first. Where did my father die? A short pause. Fresno. He was at Valley Medical for the last few weeks. Gerald was the one who handled the arrangements. There wasn't anyone else. Fresno, not Clovis. so the geography was different from what I'd assumed in the car. 40 minutes from Kettrick still, just in the other direction. When in 2019? March, she said, the 14th. I was at Del Mar by March 2019. I'd started in November 2018. So yes, my father had died while I was already here, already working the yard off Route 9, already living on Sutter Street. He had been 40 minutes north for some part of that time, and I had been here, and neither of us had known the other was findable. Or one of us had known. That was the part I kept not quite landing on. "Louise," I said, "did my father know about me? Not just that I existed. Did he know where I was?" The pause this time was the kind that means the person on the other end is deciding how to be honest. "Gerald thought he might have," she said carefully. "He didn't know for certain. He said your father had become very private in his last few years. He didn't share much. Gerald only found out Daniel had died because someone at the hospice called a number they found in his wallet, an old number of Gerald's that happened to still work." "What was in his wallet besides the number?" "I don't know, Ray. Gerald didn't tell me everything." I thanked her and ended the call. Then I sat at the kitchen table with the shoebox for a long time, and eventually I read the letter. It took 2 readings to absorb it properly, because the first time through, I was reading too fast, scanning for the parts that would confirm or deny the specific thing I was worried about. The letter was 2 pages in Gerald's even handwriting, and it said what Louise had already told me. It said the estrangement, the regret, the decision to reach out posthumously rather than in person. It was honest without being self-pitying, which I respected. It did not pretend to more certainty than Gerald had. It said, "I believe your father may have known you were nearby in his last year or 2. I cannot confirm this. I found evidence that he had made inquiries and that he had learned your name through your mother, though whether she gave it willingly or it was found another way I cannot say. I do not want to poison your memory of someone you never met with speculation. I am telling you only because you deserve to have every piece I have, even the imperfect ones. Your mother. Whether she gave it willingly or it was found another way." I put the letter down and looked at my apartment, the kitchen counter with the canvas bag on it, the window with the afternoon light on the sill, the patio door to the strip of untenanted grass, the door that went outside. Ground floor, Unit 4, facing the back. Gerald had watched the yard from Route 9. That was the one time he'd mentioned, the one Louise knew about. But Gerald had also known where I lived, and Daniel Cahill had apparently made inquiries into my location at some point before he died. I got up and walked to my patio door. It's a sliding glass door with a single-bar security lock. A metal rod in the track that prevents the panel from opening more than about 2 inches. The bar was there, in position. I checked it with my hand. Then I checked the back window of the bedroom and the bathroom window that doesn't lock correctly, which I've known about for 4 years and have never reported to Dennis, the landlord, because it's been easier to not think about it. The bathroom window latches with a small flip mechanism that has a hairline crack in the plastic housing. It catches if you push it into exactly the right position, but if you push the window from outside at the right angle, the latch flexes and releases. I know this because I've closed it from the inside dozens of times and felt the give in it. I've never thought about it as a point of entry because I live in a building with other people, and this is a ground floor unit, and I have, until 6 weeks ago, had no reason to think about anyone approaching this particular apartment with any particular intention. I stood in the bathroom for a moment, looking at the window. Then I went to my work jacket, the inside pocket where I'd been keeping the photograph from Gerald's Volvo. The photograph of the highway, in case you haven't seen it yet. I'd spent time trying to identify the road. Route 9, Route 33, the highway grid of the Central Valley. What I had not done was try to identify the direction of the light, which was something I knew how to do imperfectly, but well enough. The light in the photograph came from low on the horizon, throwing a long shadow off a roadside marker on the right shoulder. The shadows fell to the right of the frame. If the photographer was facing the direction of travel, that meant the light source was to the left. Low on the horizon meant early morning or late evening. If morning, the light was in the east, which would put the photographer facing roughly north or south on a road running north-south, with east to their left. That's approximate. That's not a location. But combined with the flat terrain and the curve of the road in the distance, it narrowed things considerably in the Central Valley, where north-south roads outnumber east-west, and where the flatness itself is a distinguishing characteristic. I looked at the photograph differently now. Not as a clue to a location, but as a document of someone's perspective. Someone sitting in a dark green Volvo on the shoulder of a two-lane road early in the morning, taking a picture through the windshield or the side window, before or after going somewhere. Before or after driving to Kettrick, maybe. Before or after sitting on Route 9 watching an orange-fenced salvage yard. Gerald had taken this photograph. Or my father had. That was a question I couldn't answer from the photograph itself, and it mattered, because those were two different things. Gerald arranging a posthumous introduction was one kind of story. My father, finding my location before he died, and doing nothing with it, was a different kind of story, with a different shape of wound in it. Monday, I went back to work. Cars came in and I documented them. Marcus asked if I was all right and I said I was fine, just hadn't been sleeping well. He accepted this without follow-up, which is one of Marcus's virtues. I processed 3 vehicles by 3 o'clock, and then I did something I'd been circling. I looked up my father's death record. California death records from 2019 are public record. I found the index entry through the state's Vital Records portal. It takes a few days to receive the certificate if you order it, but the index entry is accessible with a name and a year. Daniel James Cahill, March 14th, 2019, Fresno County. Cause of death listed in the index as natural causes. The certificate could tell me more listed address, informant, next of kin, but the certificate takes 2 weeks to arrive and costs $22, and I wasn't sure I wanted to wait 2 weeks. What I did instead was call Valley Medical Center in Fresno and asked to be connected to the medical records department. I explained that I was the son of a patient who had died in their facility in March 2019, and that I was trying to close an estate matter and needed to confirm the patient's listed next of kin from the admission records. The woman I reached was polite and firm. She could not release medical records to anyone without proper documentation of their relationship to the patient. I understand, I said. I'm not asking for medical information. I'm asking whether there's a name on the next of kin field. That would still fall under protected health information for a deceased patient, she said. You'd need to submit a written request with proof of relationship and authorization. I can send you the form. I gave her my email address. The form arrived 20 minutes later, 8 pages long. I filled out what I could and attached what I had: my own birth certificate, my mother's name as the listed parent, my father's name as listed on my birth certificate. I uploaded the scan and submitted it, and was told to expect a response within 15 to 30 business days. 15 to 30 business days. I closed my laptop and sat with that for a while. The question I was trying to answer was this: if Daniel Cahill had found my address before he died, had he listed me as next of kin? Had he written my name somewhere in a form in a hospital in Fresno, under a field that said, "In case of emergency"? or notify upon admission, without ever calling the number. It was possible to write a name in a field without calling. It was possible to locate a person and know their address and never knock on the door, the same way Gerald had driven to Route 9 and watched the yard from the road and left. Maybe it ran in families, the not quite doing it, the arranging of approaches that stopped just short of arrival. I drove home at 5:30. I was halfway up the walk to my building's entrance when I noticed the patio gate at the back was unlatched. It's a low wooden gate between the parking lot and the back strip of grass, and it fastens with a simple hook. It was hanging open about 6 inches. I stop and notice things like that. It's occupational. I noted it and went inside through the front. My apartment was undisturbed. Everything where I'd left it. The canvas bag on the counter, the shoebox on the table, the photograph of the highway propped against the fruit bowl I use for keys and mail. I walked through all 3 rooms because I do that now, which started the night I first found the map, and has not stopped. Everything was where it should be, except the bathroom window. I had left the latch in its caught position, pushed firmly into the right angle to engage it. The latch was still technically closed, but the small flip mechanism was rotated a quarter turn from where I'd set it. Not open, but disturbed. The way it would look if someone had tested it from the outside and found the give in the housing, and then, instead of entering, had let it close again. Or the way it would look if the latch had shifted on its own due to temperature differential or building vibration, which is also possible. I know which explanation I prefer. I went back to the kitchen and stood for a moment. Then I took the photograph of the highway out of the fruit bowl and looked at it one more time, in case you haven't seen it yet. Gerald had written that on the back of a photograph of a road that might be nothing, or might be the road you take from Clovis to Kettrick, or might be a road my father once sat on in the early morning hours before deciding not to drive any further. The photograph was Gerald's act of pointing not at a location, but at a fact. A thing that had been approaching me for years through people I was related to and had never met. Through decisions that had been made about what to tell me and what to withhold. Through a geometry of proximity I had been living inside without knowing it. My father had possibly known where I was, had possibly sat 40 minutes from me and made the same choice Gerald described making from Route 9, watching from a distance, not coming in. And my mother had known Gerald was looking for me, had given him my address, and had said nothing for a year and a half. Not from cruelty, from something older and more complicated than cruelty. From the particular protectiveness of a woman who had spent 30 years managing the absence of a man, and who was not ready to have that absence become complicated again. All of it was true simultaneously. Gerald's intentions had been genuine. My mother's silence had been protective and also wrong. My father might have come close and turned around, or might not have come close at all. I was living in an apartment that a dying man had specifically targeted as the end of a sequence, and the bathroom window had a broken latch, and I did not know with certainty who had tested it. There was one thing I could do that I had been avoiding since I sat in the coffee shop in Madeira and understood what had been arranged for me. The Volvo was still in my yard. I'd logged it as awaiting disposition, which in practice meant it was sitting in the B row, waiting for Marcus to schedule the strip. I'd done that on purpose without deciding to. I'd kept it on the lot the same way I'd kept the canvas bag on my counter. Not resolution, just deferral. The Volvo still had its glove box. I'd removed the insurance card and the owner's manual and bagged them as personal effects, but I hadn't physically searched the glove box cavity itself, behind where those items sit. I'd looked in it, the way you look in a glove box when you open it, but I hadn't reached to the back of it the way you search a space. I hadn't done that because I'd been in a hurry that first day. or because I'd already found the photograph in the door pocket and that had occupied my attention, or because I don't always do the thorough search on a vehicle when the documentation is thin and the car is clearly personal rather than commercial. All of that was true, and none of it was the real reason. The real reason was that I'd understood, in some part of me that was paying closer attention than the rest, that the Volvo still had something in it. Gerald had been careful and deliberate about every other element of this arrangement. The map to my apartment, the canvas bag with its careful contents, the letter he'd given Louise with instructions not to deliver until I came. He had layered this intentionally, given me choices at each stage about how far to go. There was one more layer. I was almost certain of it. Tomorrow morning, before Marcus's shift started, I was going to finish processing that car. I got to the yard at 6:40, 20 minutes before Marcus and 40 before Petra. The gate combination hadn't changed in 3 years. I let myself in and walked the B row in the early light. The sky was that particular pale gray that happens before color returns to anything, when everything looks like a photocopy of itself. The Volvo was in B-14. I'd put it there myself. I stood next to it for a moment with my hands in my jacket pockets. The dark green paint had a fine layer of yard dust on it now, the kind that settles on everything within a week. The cracked driver's side mirror caught the gray light. It looked smaller than I remembered from the first day, which cars sometimes do once they've been in the yard long enough. They start to look like parts, rather than objects that carried a person through a life. I opened the passenger door, which I hadn't done on the first inspection, because the documentation items were on the driver's side and in the rear cargo. The passenger interior was clean. No debris, no personal items. The seat was in its standard position, not adjusted for anyone. On the floor mat, near the center console, there was a faint rectangular outline in the dust, the ghost of something that had been sitting there and had been removed. The clearance company, probably. Or Gerald, clearing the car before he turned it over to the estate process. I opened the glove box. The insurance card and owner's manual were gone. I'd taken those. The cavity behind where they'd been was about 8 inches deep and slightly recessed. The back wall flocked in that cheap gray material that all glove boxes use. I reached in and ran my hand along the back wall, then the floor of the cavity. There was an envelope taped to the underside of the glove box lid. Not the back wall, the lid, the part that faces down when the box is open. If you open a glove box and look in, you're looking at the bottom and the back. You don't naturally look at the underside of the lid. I hadn't. It was a standard white envelope, sealed, the kind that comes in a box of 200. My name on the front in Gerald's handwriting. Underneath my name, in smaller letters, from your father. Gerald held this. Open when you're ready, not before. The yard was quiet. Somewhere on Route 9, a truck passed, the diesel sound rising and falling. A bird was doing something in the scrub oak near the back fence. I peeled the tape carefully, which I did for no reason, except that it felt like the right way to do it. The envelope came off without tearing. I stood there in the early light next to my dead uncle's car and held a letter my father had written. I want to be accurate about what I felt in that moment, because I've thought about it a lot since. It wasn't the thing you might expect. It wasn't grief exactly, or relief. It was closer to the feeling of a pressure equilibrating, something that had been held in suspension for a very long time, settling into a new position. Not comfortable, not resolved, just different. Heavier in a way that was also more manageable than the weightlessness of not knowing. I put the envelope in my jacket pocket, next to where I'd been keeping Gerald's photograph. Then I closed the glove box and stood for another minute with my hand on the car's roof. Not for any sentimental reason, I just wasn't ready to walk away yet. Marcus's truck pulled into the lot at 7:02. I nodded to him, told him the Volvo in B14 was ready for scheduling whenever he had space, that I'd completed the intake. He nodded back and went to the tool trailer. That was the extent of it. The Volvo would get stripped and crushed, and the steel would go somewhere and be made into something else. That was always going to be the end of it. Gerald had known that when he chose it as the vehicle, not just a car, but a car that would reach me through my own hands and then disappear. Nothing left to go back to. Nothing left to interrogate further. I sat in my own truck and opened my father's letter. It was 3 pages, handwritten, but the handwriting was different from Gerald's, looser, less even, with places where the pen had pressed harder or the letters had tilted. The way handwriting tilts when someone is writing quickly or when their hands aren't entirely steady. It was dated October 2018, which was 4 months before he died, and 1 month before I started at Del Mar. He'd known approximately where I was before I took this job, which meant he'd been tracking me through an earlier address, or through my mother, or through some other thread I couldn't reconstruct. He wrote, "I found your name through your mother's records. I'm not proud of how I did it, and I won't describe it in a way that makes it sound acceptable." He didn't describe it further. He wrote that he had known about me since shortly after my mother and he separated, that she had told him once and then asked him not to contact her again, and that he had honored that in the way men honor things they're ashamed of, which is to say, imperfectly and too late. He wrote that he had driven to Reedley once in 2012 and had parked outside the school where Claudia worked because he'd found my address and known I was married, and somehow connected me to that school, which was not the kind of thing I had any way to verify or contradict. Claudia and I had been married about 2 years. He had been there and had not come in. Same as Gerald on Route 9, the same exact architecture proximity without contact, watching without declaring. He wrote that he understood this was not a virtue. He wrote it plainly, without asking for forgiveness, which I appreciated more than I would have appreciated a request. He said, "I am not writing to be forgiven. I am writing because Gerald thinks I should, and because I've learned to trust Gerald's judgment in things where I have consistently failed to trust my own. I am also writing because I am sick, and because the time for strategic silence has run out." He wrote about his life in general terms, the equipment work, the years of moving around the valley, the gradual simplification of circumstances that happens when a person lives alone and doesn't accumulate anything that needs managing. He wrote about Gerald, briefly, and with obvious affection. He wrote, "Your uncle is a better man than me. I've known this for most of my life, and found it easier to stay away from him than to sit with the evidence." And then, near the end of the 2nd page, he wrote, "I know you're in Kettrick. I drove out there in August, and I sat on Route 9, and I looked at the salvage yard, and I thought about what it would mean to walk in. I watched for about an hour. I didn't see you. I thought about coming back, but I didn't. And then I got worse faster than expected, and Gerald took over the arrangement. I'm glad he's better at this than I am." August 2018. I had not yet started at Del Mar. I was still working the equipment rental place in Visalia that fall, commuting, looking for something closer. Dennis had posted the intake job in October, so my father had driven to Kettrick to watch a yard where I didn't yet work. He had been operating on information that was either slightly outdated or that pointed to Kettrick generally, to my address on Sutter Street, rather than to the job specifically. He had possibly sat on Route 9 looking at the orange weather stripping on the fence of a salvage yard where I would begin working 3 months later, watching for someone who wasn't there yet. I read the last page slowly. He'd written, I don't know what kind of man you are. I know your name and your general whereabouts and the name of the woman you were married to. And I know that you've stayed in the same county for several years, which suggests either that you found something worth staying for, or that you found somewhere that doesn't require much from you. I don't mean that as a criticism. I know what it's like to find a place that doesn't require much. I lived in that arrangement for a long time, and I understand its appeal. What I want you to know is that you were not a mistake, or an accident, or a thing I walked away from because of what you were. I walked away from your mother, and you were part of that, which is not your fault. You were a reason to stay that I was not big enough to honor. I've known that for 28 years, and I'll know it until I stop knowing anything. Gerald will see that this reaches you in a way that gives you a choice. I asked him to do it that way because you deserve the choice. If you've read this far, then you made it. And I'm glad. I don't expect anything from you. I'm not owed anything. But if you want to know more about who I was, and you may not, which is reasonable, Gerald will have things. He'll know what to share. The letter ended there. No closing, no signature. Just the end of the 3rd page, and then the back of it. Blank. I sat in my truck until 8:15, when the morning had fully arrived and the yard was operating, and I needed to start my day. I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope, and put the envelope in my jacket pocket alongside Gerald's photograph and the printed map I had not thrown away. Then I went to work. I called my mother that evening, not to be angry with her. I had moved through most of the anger during the drive back from Madeira, and the rest of it had dissolved sometime during the 40 minutes I'd sat in my truck. What was left wasn't forgiveness exactly, because forgiveness implies an accounting I wasn't ready to do. It was more like a kind of tired clarity. She had made decisions. The decisions had consequences. I was one of them. I told her I'd found the letter. I told her what it said, in general terms. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "He came to Reedley." Did he say that? In 2012, yes. I know, she said. I saw the car. I didn't tell you because I didn't know how to. We stayed on the phone for another half hour without saying much that was conclusive. She cried once, briefly, in the way she cries, which is to get it done quickly and move on. I told her I wasn't calling to make her feel worse. She said she knew that. Before we hung up, she said, "He was not always a bad person. He was a person who couldn't do the hard thing. There's a difference." "I know," I said, and found that I did. I called Louise the following week. I told her I'd found the last envelope. She said she'd hoped I would, that Gerald had worried the glove box was too obscure, that he'd almost left it in the sun visor instead. The image of a dying man, debating the placement of a hidden letter in his dead brother's car. The specificity of that made me put the phone down for a second before I could continue. She asked if I wanted to see the things Gerald had kept. He'd had photographs, she said. Not many. Gerald hadn't been a collector, but some. A few from when he and my father were young, before everything went wrong between them. A couple from later. She had them. I said yes. I said I'd come up sometime in the next few weeks. That was 3 months ago. I've been once, then again. Louise makes decent coffee and has strong opinions about water rights, and talks about Gerald with a directness that I've come to appreciate, in the same way I appreciated the letter's lack of apology. She knew him. She tells me what she knew, and doesn't manufacture things she didn't know, which is rarer than it should be. I have 3 photographs of my father now. In 2 of them, he's young, early 20s, standing with Gerald in flat country, in the kind of light you see in the Central Valley in October. In the 3rd, he's older, mid-50s maybe, thinner, squinting into the camera with an expression I've caught on my own face in bathroom mirrors, not unhappy, not happy, just present. waiting for the moment to be over so he can go back to whatever he was doing. The Volvo was crushed in late March. I watched it go through the compressor from a distance, which is not something I usually do. Marcus didn't ask why. The bathroom window has a new latch now. I reported it to Dennis in mid-March, told him the housing was cracked and the catch wasn't holding. He sent a maintenance guy the following Tuesday, who replaced the whole mechanism in about 15 minutes. I don't know if the old latch had been tested from outside or not. I decided I didn't need to know. Whatever that was, a random test, a branch, a differential in temperature. It was behind a working latch now, and the decision to fix it was the right one regardless. The canvas bag is on the shelf in my bedroom closet. I kept the compass rose patch because it's a good piece of sewing, and because Gerald made it, and he was a man who maintained things carefully. And that matters to me now, in a way it didn't used to. The photograph of the highway is in the shoebox, with the letters and the license and the 3 new photographs Louise gave me. I've looked at it again since reading my father's letter. The road going somewhere in flat country, under early morning light. The long shadows, the curve disappearing in the distance. Gerald had written, in case you haven't seen it yet, which I'd understood as a reference to the literal road, the approach to Kettrick, the geography of the arrangement. I think now it meant something different. I think it meant, in case you haven't seen yet, that you were being moved toward. In case you haven't understood that there were people in your orbit whose orbits touched yours in ways you were never told about. In case the shape of what happened to you hasn't been clear. I've seen it now. The door to my apartment is the same door it's always been. I've lived here 4 years, and I know what it looks like from the inside, and from the parking lot, and from the strip of untended grass at the back. Nothing about it is remarkable. A man who was my father may have stood outside it once, or may have stayed on Route 9 2 miles away, and looked at a fence, and then gotten sick, faster than expected, and run out of time. I can't fix that. I can't go back to August 2018 and be at the yard when he was watching from the road. I can't make either of us the kind of person who would have walked toward the other one. What I can do is drive to Madeira on a Saturday and sit in Louise's kitchen and look at photographs of a young man in a field who had my jaw and my eyes, and who was not, in the end, unreachable. Just late. Just imperfectly arranged. Just delivered through the specific and particular machine that his older brother built for him in the final months of a well-organized life. I went to work this morning. Cars came in. I documented them